labor rights, we're talking about other kinds of rights. And this person, Mr. March, happened to come from the labor division of the US budget. So he had an interest in welfare and labor. And to him, the way to move forward was to construct the whole debate now about the move forward for the consumer movement as a rights. And that was amazing. And so that speech then saw this huge light for us. It's like the Olympic torch for us. We finally had a statement with rights that became our slogan, that became talked about all over. But this movement would have been nothing if not for the fact that there was a worldwide consumer movement that took this flame, like the Olympic flame, and we went out and we lighted torches all over the world on this matter. And that was the work of the International Organization of Consumers. That was the work of Consumer International. And so you found, immediately after that, a very interesting situation. And it's really amazing. 69, a few years later, the International Cooperative Alliance had a charter on consumer rights. And their charter was very interesting, and I just want to share that with you because it's often forgotten of how close the cooperative movement was with the consumer movement. And particularly so in the Scandinavian countries where the cooperative movement was very often one of the anchors of the consumer movement, as you will find, for example, in Denmark. And this cooperative alliance, imagine in their consumer rights charter, they call it the International Declaration of Consumer Rights. They use that particular term. What do they say? A reasonable standard of nutrition, clothing, and housing. Adequate standards of safety and healthy environment, free from pollution. This is 1969. Yeah? Access to unadulterated merchandise. Unadulterated merchandise. You know, adulteration was a huge issue in the third world. In India, it was one of the main movements at the beginning for consumer groups. At fair prices, were fair prices, reasonable variety and choice. Yeah? Access to relevant information on goods and services, and to education on consumer rights. How revolutionary, yeah? 69. And this is very important, the fifth one. Influence in economic life and democratic participation in its control. What a declaration of consumer rights. It tells you that you are in the center. The consumer is also the citizen, and everything that we do ultimately also depends on your active participation in the political systems, because the political system is your system. You vote, and you can vote with the right people who will protect consumer interests, or you can vote for others. You can vote with your pocket to make sure that business. And this power of the vote for both government and for businesses is the greatest power that we have, because we are both consumers and citizens at the same time, and have this powerful possibility. And then in 1973, a few years later, the Council of Europe, precursor to the present thing, they had a consumer protection charter in 1973, and they took Kennedy's rights. They added one more. They added redress in that. And then it's very interesting as we move on. In 1974, soon after, the International Labour Organization, ILO, I talked about cooperatives, and of course I haven't talked about very early the consumer movement was very much with women's organizations. The earliest consumer league in the United States was a women's organization. And this ILO, the first UN document, a study guide on consumer protection, was done by, interestingly, ILO. Yeah. Not by any other agencies, where they showed that workers are also consumers, and that there are two ways by which they can improve their well-being and their welfare. One is they can fight for increased salary, increased income. Two, with the income that they have, if that is protected, if that is used wisely, you also increase your real well-being and your real welfare. So the labor movement became very central also to the consumer movement in many parts of the world, and the Scandinavian and many other places. And this interesting study is useful also to put on the website, as should be Kennedy's speech, Kennedy's documentation. You have the written version of it, and I think it should be available just with a click in the future. And then 1 year later in '75, and it's extremely interesting again, the Commission on Human Rights of the United Nations began to explore economic, social, and cultural rights. And in the report, and the report is by an interesting person, Manucher Ganji. I'm sure he's from India. This is going back to '75. And he was the special rapporteur for this. And in his report, he made a very remarkable statement. People, and this is the UN speaking, the UN Commission, people must know and assert their rights. Not simple language, rights, consumer rights must be put in. People must know, he uses the word, and assert, he uses that word, their rights as consumers, if they are to obtain the maximum benefit from the development process. Know and assert. What powerful, again, statement. And from '75, then, this flame lighting of IOCU all over the world continued. And we already had in different parts of the world, you can see big flames being lighted up on consumer rights. The UN, International Labour Organization, Commission on Rights, Council of Europe, we obviously were becoming acknowledged as a force, acknowledged as a very important central thing that all governments, all UN agencies, every country should recognize. So for us in IOCU, we needed to continue this banner because it was a little bit in pieces. So when in 1974, I was asked to set up the Asia Pacific office of Consumers International, I was given $500 by UNESCO to do consumer education. Wow, I said, $500 to do consumer education. And I said, where do I start? And when I looked at all the things, and looking back at my years in the consumer movement, when I started the Consumer Association of Penang in '69, I said, one of the things that, if I want to have one message, I could not find that message. I could not find the message. When I looked through it, I said, we must take as central to our work the consumer rights issue. So I studied the whole consumer rights area, and I did a set of posters on these consumer rights. And I took the 4 from Kennedy, the additional 1 from Europe. I studied the International Cooperative Alliance. I looked at the ILO, the ILO movement for basic needs that became developed. And so through a series of connections to the world, we developed this charter of 8 consumer rights, adding together issues relating to environment, issues relating to basic needs, and several others. And now we have this particular charter that I show you. And the full charter and the full story of the various steps that we took is actually available outside, free for you, when you can take back. It's the charter that I showed you, plus the whole story at the back in terms of the various stages. And there too, of course, is a whole book that gives you very, very much more detail, which Alan mentioned earlier. So this consumer rights movement, the first time it was formally adopted was here, at the ASEAN Consumer Protection. It was a regional meeting. This is our European equivalent of the European Community for all the ASEAN nations. And in Manila, we had the ASEAN Declaration on Consumer Protection. And there, for the first time, these 8 documents. And that was also a very, very historic occasion, that this adoption of this charter formally in international meeting of consumers, including, of course, the ASEAN Secretariat, occurred here in Manila. So this move gave us a clarion call, gave us a center. But I felt one of the things that was also missing was that we didn't have a platform by which we can move these rights not only into the agenda, but also into the popular domain. That is, to make it into popular culture, to make it popularly talked about. So we decided on the idea of World Consumer Rights Day. That was 1982. And we decided now the whole world will begin to have a day where we remember this particular aspect of our work. It's celebrated. And we talked a little bit about whether we should move towards getting the UN also to declare it officially. And I've already suggested, I think among the 11 things, not 10, that this should be one of the issues to be taken up, and it's a way of getting the consumer protection issue back on the agenda again. We've done that with several days. I began the International Day of Protection of Migrant Workers on the rooftop of a UN building 10 over years ago, and we just did it as citizens. So we got that. We did it with World Wetlands Day. We just announced it ourselves among the NGOs, and we took it slowly to the UN, and World Wetlands Day got it. We had World Breastfeeding Week, we took it. The UN has not officially adopted it, but if you look at the website of the World Health Organization, they claim it as one of their activities. We are very happy. The UN takes it on. We don't need a resolution. As long as they take it and celebrate it. So movements can go and they can become universal, and they become centered. They give us soul, they give us spirit, they give us the inspiration, they give us the energy that we need. Indrani said that I should not just speak of the last 50 years. She said I should speak about the next 50 years. Looks like I'm going to be talking until after your dessert, Indrani. Now, if we look at the future, I talked about this triple crisis that we have, and what horrendous, sort of all the kind of, you can say, structural violence that we can think of in the world today is embodied in these three crises: the economic financial crisis, the environmental crisis, and then the equity crisis that we have. And then, and the crisis is just also symbolized in another way, that there are more people in the world today that are obese than who are suffering from malnutrition. So you can see again, another amazing, and CI 30 years ago had a poster, and it's a wonderful poster to put up again, and it was a set of two posters done by one of the greatest African artists, graphic designer. His name is Chess, and if you just go to a website or just Google Creative Defiance, you'll see him, and you'll even see these posters. It says, food is a problem. There's one person who's starving to death. Another one, food is a problem. There's a person who can't even move because of their behavior, in terms of food, eating, and so on. It's interesting. So what of the future? The first thing is that the future is not someplace that's out there to which you can just walk over. It's a journey. It's a journey. And that journey, you decide how you're going to make and what you do. And that journey will change the destination,